Hi everyone, I'm Alexis, and today I will be showing you how to make a mint Oreo cake. So this will be about my fourth time making this cake. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's a good combination of chocolate and mint. So to get started, we will first put a little glue dot of frosting into the middle of our piping, or into the middle of our cake board. And then over here I have our chocolate cakes. So you want to make sure that they're already cut and leveled, so you want to make sure that the part that you cut on is facing down, so you have a flat surface on top to work on. So then you can either use your piping bag to put the buttercream onto the cake, or you can just take it straight out of the bowl. I find using the piping bag is a lot easier. So just kind of starting from the inside out, I'm just going to pipe a really nice layer of buttercream into the middle of our cake. Sometimes you have to hold the turntable so it won't move while you frost, which can sometimes be difficult, especially when you're working with one person, but you find a way to work around it. So we have our first layer. I'm just going to smooth it out to make sure that every single piece has a good layer of mint frosting. So now that it is smoothed out, I'm going to add just a little bit more just because it's a really thin middle layer. And you kind of want a little bit of a thick layer because it'll help give you some height to the cake, but also give you more of that good buttercream frosting. And it's okay if the buttercream is spilling off the edges of your cake. You'll clean it up when you do your crumb coat. So then we'll take our next cake with the cut side facing down. As you can see, there are some gaps right here. We'll just go back through and cover it up with frosting later when we do our crumb coat. So we'll do the same thing we just did on that bottom layer, and we will pipe our frosting on. And when you're doing this part, you don't have to have a nozzle on your cake. I'm just doing this for the sake of saving dishes and just because why not? Sometimes it's fun. So once again, we'll just pipe our little ring around, building up a nice center layer. The buttercream acts as a glue for our cakes, helping keep each layer together and sticking. So we have it flat again. Sometimes you can see that your cakes are uneven. Like this is just falling over a little bit. I'm just going to stick a little bit of frosting right here to help keep it upright while I place my third top on. And we're actually going to put just a little bit more buttercream right here. So I made a mint buttercream to go with this. Instead of using peppermint extract, I use a peppermint doTERRA oil. And you don't need very much of the oil because it provides a really nice flavor, and it just kind of comes to you subtly, and then it'll stick around, but it won't be overpowering or distasteful either. So now we have our cakes stacked, and we're going to go in for our crumb coat. So first thing I'm going to do is start by filling in our little crevices right here. So kind of the little craters that we've made in our cake. And just go through and fill them in. It's okay if it's not even or lined up. Just want to make sure that your cakes are centered when you do this. There are two different size pans, so they're going to be a little uneven when we go through and smooth them. But for the most part, they're about the same width. One's just a little bit longer, like so. But if you want to make it a lot easier for yourself when you're decorating your cakes, you want to make sure to have the same size pans. But if you're willing to work around it, then having fairly similar sized will work. So I'm going to refill my piping bag. If you curl over the edges and then you get a cupped hand underneath, you can use that to help scrape off your buttercream from your spatula. So pick some of this up, get it into our piping bag. So we'll start with that for now. You don't want to overfill your piping bag, otherwise you can have frosting coming out the top of the bag and it can just get really messy, especially when you're trying to decorate the cake. Because then you have frosting all over your hands, you're sticky, it's just no fun. So we'll just finish filling in here. And we'll just end it right over there. So now I'm going to take my offset spatula that we used. And I'm just going to go around and smooth out any of our edges and kind of spread that buttercream down onto the cake, creating our crumb coat. So when you're thinning out, you want to make sure to cover up any of the gaps in the holes where we connected our cakes, just because it'll make doing our final coat of buttercream a whole lot easier to do. And when you're doing your scratch coat, you don't need a lot of buttercream. I find I personally don't need a lot of buttercream, but that can always depend on the type of cake that you use. So we'll just spread a thin layer up here on top. And then we're going to go through and make sure that we get this little bottom hole filled up when we do this. Just kind of go through and make sure it's all filled up. We'll get that little hole right here filled. So I need just a little bit more in a few of these spots just so I can get it covered up fully. So typically after you're done scratch coating your cakes, you want to pop it into the, oh, there's my small bowl. You want to pop it into the fridge or the freezer for just a little bit just to get that frosting hard. But for today, we'll just skip that step and we will start going in with our coat. So before you start your scratch coat, you want to clean off your spatula using a separate bowl than the bowl that your frosting is in, so you don't get cake crumbs into your good frosting that you want to look nice and presented. So now I'm going to go in with a fairly thick layer of buttercream going up around the sides. So unlike what happened right here, you want to try and make sure that you have very few gaps in between while you're filling the top or filling the sides of your cake. And I'm going to try and make sure to cover up as much of this cake as I can. And then I'll go back through later if I need to and cover up more of the buttercream. So the cake is just a little uneven, which sometimes happens to me. If you really wanted it even, you want to make sure that you're cutting the uneven tops off your cakes. I didn't do that today. but it'll still work all the same. So now that we have our thick layer of frosting on, we are going to take our cake scraper. So typically how this set is supposed to be used is you want to use this rounded edge, but because I want clear, crisp bottoms, I'm actually going to flip it over and use this straight edge side to use it. So we might see some awkward little buttercream circles come through at the bottom right here, but essentially you're going to go through and at a slight angle, you're going to go around and just lightly press on the cake, smoothing that frosting out. Sometimes you want to go back and just restart scratching. But you can kind of start to see the holes that are appearing around our cake. So like this big hole right here, you can see all the cake here. Got a couple of gaps right there. We'll just take more of our frosting and fill them in. And just, you're trying to make sure that you're hiding as much of the cake as you can. And just filling in all these little holes. Then we'll go back in with our scraper and smooth them out. So when you're pressing on the sides, you want to try not to, or I guess I shouldn't say press. When you're trying to smooth out your sides, you don't want to press too much. Otherwise, you can start to take away from the smoothing that you have just done. So there's no cake crumbs in this coating, so I'm going to reuse it. Just kind of put it back on, smooth it out with my offset. Work on getting it in some spots that need a little bit more frosting coverage. So kind of like right down here. And then again right over here. So just like that, we're going to go through and we're going to lightly press on our sides, work on getting it really nice and shiny. And then pretty much once you have most of your holes covered up, I'm going to go back through right here. You're going to want to go through and work on smoothing it to get it to a really nice, fine, shiny layer. So I'll do a little up here. Take a touch from our bowl over here. And then we're going to start smoothing it. So just really lightly scraping over the top, working on getting any imperfections off. And getting those holes filled in. As you're going around, you're gonna, and you want to keep going over, you want to make sure to take the frosting off that has built up. Otherwise, you're going to undo all the work you just did. So I'm just going to go back to the top and try and cover up some of these holes. So see how I had all this frosting on, you kind of see how it started patching. So that's kind of why you want to take the frosting off the cake as you smooth it. So I'm gonna need a little bit more frosting because there's some cake popping through and a couple of bubbles. So you just want to try, if you're gonna do it at this stage, you want to try and make sure it's in a fairly thin layer and you're getting it spread out, because we can go back over and smooth it, but there does become a point where you have gotten it all smooth and then you find one imperfection, and then it can just be very hard to try and re-smooth the whole cake. So we'll just do this right here quick. Get our bottom all nice and touched up. Try and fill in any of these holes. Okay, so we are now going to go in for our final smooth. At this point, if you have a lot of cake showing, you can try to add a lot more buttercream and make a thicker layer overall. And sometimes you can just take your frosting spilled scraper and just lightly put it back onto the cake. And then scrape at like a steep angle, kind of like this. So I'm going to take this off. And you can see it starting to get smoothed out as we go. So just kind of want to go in a steep angle and then get it there. So one thing you do have to be careful of when doing this is the more you start to get good sides, the more frosting you're going to start taking off. So at some point you do have to say, is this good? Do I like this? I'm going to try and cover up this back cake patch right here, but otherwise just kind of the little bit of cake that is showing through can kind of give it a good aesthetic depending on what you're going for. So I'm just going to cover up this really big cake spot right here, just a little bit of frosting, and then we'll move on to finish frosting our top. So when I'm going through and I'm doing like my last final scrapes, I'm just trying to go super thin and make sure everything is even and there aren't any odd looking bubbles when I go through. So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to take my offset spatula and I'm just going to patch up this little hole back here. And then just to smooth out those hard lines, just do that really quick. Okay, so now we'll move on to our top. So I've kind of created a layer of buttercream right here that doesn't have any cake scraps on. We'll put that on the top. Grab a little bit more out of our bowl and just get it pressed down onto our cake. Building up a nice layer. And then I'm just going to push it out to the edges slowly. And then as I get to my edges, I'm going to swipe in the edges of frosting that we had from doing the outside layer of our cake. And then kind of pushing some of this frosting from the middle back out to the edges, covering up any cake. And you kind of want to be careful with this as you're working out towards your edges, because you might have to go back through and scrape again. But if they're close enough to the top, we will be adding a nice dripping ganache to the top of our cake. So if you have some little outside edges that on the top that aren't looking super great, you can kind of cover it up with that ganache. So I'm just trying to make sure that there's a nice layer of frosting up here, because as I said, we will be covering with ganache, so the top doesn't need to look spectacular. I'm just gonna take my scraper again and clean out these sides, because you want your ganache to go just right over the top. Edges of your cake. And then we'll just pull them in one more time. So I pre-prepped our ganache, so it should be at just that right dripping level. So to make your ganache, you want to use equal parts of chocolate and heavy cream. So this is about half a cup of both semi-sweet chocolate chips and heavy cream, but you could use any kind of chocolate you wanted. Now we're going to try and get it into the bottle without making a mess. So when making your ganache, you want to heat up your cream, and we've got chocolate going down the side. Heat up your cream till it is warm, and then place it into the same bowl as your chocolate chips. Once your heavy cream is heated up, then cover it tightly with cling film so you're trapping in that heat. And then let it sit for a few minutes. After you let it sit, you're going to take the saran wrap off, and then you'll take a whisk and stir it so it gets nice, shiny, and glossy. And then you'll have to let it sit so that you can get nice strips. So here comes the fun part. I'm still working on my ganache. I've become impatient with it sometimes, so hopefully this is the right consistency. And we'll just drop it off the top. I'm going a little out of order. I would have put the Oreos on before I did the ganache, but ganache is so much fun, so we'll just do this first. So I'm just making little dots and controlling the amount of ganache that is coming out of my squirt bottle. As you can see, you don't need very much. You kind of want your drips to be inconsistent and vary just a little bit. You can add a little ring right here. We're going to go down our edges. And then just fill in our center. So typically I would use a clean spatula, but we'll just scrape this one off the best we can. And then just go through and spread out our ganache, getting it to the edges. And then once your ganache is on, you want to make sure that you get it to set fully. Add a little bit more to cover up everything. Get it down there. Okay, so we'll call that coat good for now. Now, typically you want to make sure to get this into the fridge so you can let your ganache set. But we are running low on time, so we will just pipe our little pipettes on, or frosting turrets, whatever you want to call them, on. So we'll reload our frosting bag. Get it on. If you don't set your ganache, your frosting will start to, whoa, forgot to burp our bag. But if you don't let your ganache sit, your frosting can start to move. So we'll just make sure to do it a little bit more inward. So I like to do mine about 3 high. Because the ganache isn't set, the frosting is going to move just a little bit. So just try to work with that to our advantage. So I like to try and get about 5 on here. Come on. Work with me, frosting. But I think we'll probably get about 4. So depending on the size of your cake, that one looked good. Depending on the size of your cake, you can do anywhere between 5 to 8. So because we have 4, we'll place 4 Oreos on the top of each, lightly pressing it down into our cake, like so. The frosting will hold the Oreos in place. As I said, I prefer to do this before I do my ganache, so any of the drips that go under can just go straight over the Oreo crumbs. And we'll just take nice little handfuls and spread our Oreo crumbs over the bottom. I kind of like to try and get it high, give it some height variation. And then I'll just go through with my finger, try to take off any of our excess Oreos really quick. So then other than a little bit of Oreo cleanup, and then you clean up your cake board a little bit more. I'd need new gloves to do that. Or you can sometimes use your scraper. Just kind of go through the edges. We'll get it on the table. We'll clean it up later. And voila, here is a mint Oreo cake. And this is my mint Oreo cake, finished and ready to eat. Have a good day, and we'll see you back at the Tasty Tiger.